What up, what up, what up? Welcome to another episode of Office Hour Tangents, O Tangents for short, or another idea how to shorten Office Hour Tangents is the OT, because it's kind of like overtime, right? Coming straight from class. Um, the block is different now. The new class that I'm teaching is Interaction Design 3. And in Interaction Design 3, they've already been through the first two interaction design classes, which I teach. And in three, I kind of let them go, but they have to kind of redesign a screen-based application, whether it's a website, an app, something based in a kiosk. We had a student that won an Addy Award for just won an Addy Award maybe a few weeks ago for a project she built in my class where she redesigned the infotainment center system, or whatever you would call it, in her Subaru. So she kind of thought it could be redesigned better, and it was a good project, and she won an Addy for it. So in that class, they kind of go from the base level of researching, you know whatever they're going to redesign, and then researching competitors, and going all the way through site architecture, usability testing, redesigns, all that good stuff. So it's kind of like for them to like build something that will be a strong portfolio piece when they graduate. So that's the class I'm in right now. And to be honest, the tangent that I didn't go on any tangents in class because that class just started. I'm not talking a lot in that class yet. But I was just in the office with one of my colleagues, and we were talking about back in the day. We were just on a back in the day kick as designers. And we got to talking about Figma and kind of like looking at it historically. So I got into the discussion about Macromedia. So it's like you remember Macromedia. So any of you, I would call you old heads if you remember Macromedia, to be honest. But any old head designers that remember the company Macromedia. So Macromedia was, to put it in a nutshell, it was a competitor to Adobe. It had it kind of came into popularity when I started really becoming like getting into graphic design. But I understand the historians, like it was around for a long time. It was a culmination of, you know, companies acquiring other companies, and then they had like a company that had like a few programs in it. So Macromedia was a lot like Adobe in that it had multiple programs under its belt. So just like Adobe had or has Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects, all that good stuff back in the day. And I don't want to, when I say back in the day again, it doesn't really mean ancient history. This is 2000s. This is early 2000s. This is late 90s, early 2000s, right? And Macromedia was like the to me. So now I'm speaking just from my experience, not from an historical or correct standpoint. So if anybody's listening and like, no, it was really 1999, and we no. From my perspective, my introduction to Macromedia was Macromedia Dreamweaver. So, and we got to discussing about, and I'm gonna tie this into Figma in a minute. So just look, bear with me. So my design journey, it's like, almost like my design journey. I guess my interaction design journey was, and I think I mentioned this in another podcast, but in a nutshell, I had one graphic design class in undergrad at Pitt. So I was an architectural studies major, but by the time I discovered graphic design, I didn't really know what graphic design was until like junior year at Pitt. And I had one graphic design class. And at the end of that class, like there was people using Photoshop, and I'm like, how are they doing this cool stuff? I was still using colored pencils and sketching, and we learned PageMaker in that class. So any old heads remember Adobe PageMaker. PageMaker was the precursor to InDesign. And at the end of that class, I remember because I had one more year to go, and I was panicking because I didn't want to be an architect anymore, and now I wanted to be a graphic designer because I discovered graphic design in this one class. And at the end of class, I asked the professor, and he was an adjunct. I didn't even know what adjuncts were. I just thought he was a professor. He actually worked at the hospital across the street as a graphic designer. And I asked him, like, hey, I think I want to do this. I think this is kind of the direction I want to go with my career. You have any advice, since there's no other graphic design anything in the curriculum that I can kind of, any classes I can take? And he basically told me, he was like, learn Dreamweaver. And I was like, what's Dreamweaver? And he's like, it's a tool, it's a new tool. And I remember, and I would, if I had to give a year, I would say this had to be 98. This is either 97 or 98. So he was like, learn Dreamweaver. And I looked I looked on Wikipedia real quick, and I think Dreamweaver in Macromedia's version of Dreamweaver, because it was something else and they bought it and they changed the name. But Dreamweaver came out around that time, 96, 97, 98, something like that. So he's like, learn Dreamweaver. And he's like, hey, there's new, the web, and it's a tool for designers. It's a tool designed to help designers better be able to design websites. Because he said websites are going to be the future. And if you want to get into the graphic design field, this is the future of graphic design. He was almost telling me that him and his, he was teaching layout design basically in that class. And he was like, yeah, that's still going on. But the new wave, if you want to jump into it as a new professional, he's like, learn web design. And that's kind of how I got into web design. So I took that to heart and I went to the bookstore, because old school, right? And I bought the Dreamweaver Bible. And I described what the Bible was in other podcasts. But if you didn't see those, these Bible series of books were these big, giant, thick books. And it basically covered like almost every aspect of a piece of software from cover to cover, and just like every little piece. And it was way more comprehensive than whatever like Macromedia or Adobe would put out. So I got the Macromedia Dreamweaver Bible, and it came with a CD in the back, and I put it in my computer. Or I didn't have a computer at the time. I would put it into the computer lab's computer, right? And I learned Dreamweaver by going cover to cover, learning that. And that's what helped me get my first job. I was having troubles getting jobs, but the fact that I knew Dreamweaver and I started building stuff using it, that's how I got my first job, because they was looking for a graphic designer that had web experience. So I see some synergies with then and now, right? So I believe that my graphic design journey really started in like elementary school, because I was designing yearbook covers and stuff, but I didn't even know that was graphic design. But by the time I knew what graphic design was, that kind of journey started 97, 98, my junior year in undergrad. And so another tangent, right? I went off on a tangent. Macromedia. So my introduction to Macromedia was Dreamweaver. And then found out what Macromedia was. And Macromedia also had a couple other programs that I knew about then. They had a Macromedia Freehand, which is basically like an Illustrator competitor. They also had Macromedia. Before I learned about Flash, they had Macromedia Director. Director was, I would say it was more akin to After Effects, but it was really a robust program that helps you put together like kiosk-based interfaces, right? So it was kind of ahead of its time. But what I noticed about Macromedia at that time was like all their stuff were built, all the software they kind of owned was for screen-based applications, right? And then Adobe, all the stuff they had was basically for print. So if you wanted to do websites, it was like Macromedia was the way to go. They also came out with Fireworks a little later. It was called Macromedia Fireworks, and it was kind of like a Photoshop competitor, but it was all for the web. You couldn't like make things, and I might be lying, but I remember that, all the images, when you published them, they were 72 TBI. They were meant to be on screens. They weren't meant to be printed. And then they also came out with Macromedia Flash, right? So Macromedia was my stuff. Like that was my jam for a minute. And then I was rocking with that, and Flash. I was a big Flash guy. And fast forward, Flash, I was a big Flash guy and a big Dreamweaver guy, right? I was a big website guy, and I was using Flash to create these interactive pieces with motion and music and video. And I was kind of getting entrenched in that world. And then I just noticed a trend that I'm sort of noticing now, right? I noticed a trend with Macromedia that, no, I noticed a trend with Adobe. So Adobe purchased Macromedia. In my opinion, it was like, if you can't beat them, join them type of thing. So at that time, I felt like Macromedia, I don't want to say it was getting the upper hand on Adobe, but it was for web-based applications, which was how the wave was going in the design industry. Macromedia was killing the game, because it's like Adobe didn't have an answer for it. It's like they came out with like a Flash kind of competitor, and it was whack. I remember, and they had no answer for Dreamweaver and or Fireworks. They started adding things into Photoshop that were stuff that Fireworks did way better. So they just bought Macromedia, and I want to say that was, I don't know. Don't get me lying. What year? 2015. Not even 2015. I think that's when they got rid of Flash. But anyway, Adobe bought Macromedia, and then I noticed that Macromedia and Flash started leaning more into, from my perspective, started leaning more into the developer angle. So they were two tools that were created for designers. Dreamweaver was created, in my opinion, to make it easier for us designers to create websites, and we didn't have to worry too much about code. Actually, as a side note, I learned how to do front end coding, not from any class or any tutorials I took. I really learned it from using Dreamweaver because they had like some drag and drop functionality, and they had two views. It was one of the first programs with like a live view, and not a live view, but it had a design view and they had a code view. And actually, let me show it because I have it pulled up. So just to give you a, excuse me, disclaimer, if you're just listening to this podcast, sometimes I will go back and forth to screenshots. So there is a video component to this podcast if you just listen to the audio. But I'm about to just bring Dreamweaver interface up because I still use it from time to time. And let me just resize it so people can see it in the split screen. So Dreamweaver was cool because there we go. So Dreamweaver was cool to me because it was visual. So up until then, if you learn HTMLs, CSS, JavaScript, all that good stuff, I don't even think CSS was rocking at that time. But it's like you use a text editor or something like that, and you just kind of coded it, and then you had to publish it in order to see what you just coded. Or you had to have a special setup on your computer where your computer kind of acted like a virtual server, and it was just like a convoluted process. But Dreamweaver was dope because you can design in the top portion and see exactly what you're doing, and then you can code in the bottom portion, or vice versa, the left and right, depending on your setup. And that's how I learned how to code. So I would use the design tools, and it was like a drag and drop kind of functionality. It was like, oh, I wanna drop down there, I want a button there. But as I'm putting it on the top part, I can see the code in the bottom part. So then after a while, it's like cheating for a test. Not saying that I ever cheated on a test, but it was kind of like cheating on the test, right? The times that I tried to cheat on tests, and I have tried to cheat on tests, right? 8 times out of 10, I would get to the test and I wouldn't need to use my cheating tools because in the midst of cheating or trying to cheat, I actually learned the information. So that was kind of how I learned HTML and Java. I mean, HTML and CSS was I would design, and then in the bottom code part, I would see the code that was generated. So then almost all the time, if I wanted to make little tweaks, it was easier for me to make the tweak in the code part and not the design part. And then eventually, after a few years, I started primarily working in the code part, and then I can just see how it looked instantaneously. So that was really good for designers because it gave a split view. But I noticed over time that they started adding more developer tools, right? And I don't blame them. I don't blame Adobe because, in my opinion, developer, if you have a demographic that you focus on that's developer centric, they have more money, right? Just to be honest, they tend to have like more bodies, more money, and they have more demand. So when they started demanding stuff like we want this and we want that, I could see them making changes for developers and implementing features for developers, but they weren't doing anything new for us designers. The design view still sucked, and I just noticed it becoming more of a developer tool. I noticed the same thing with Adobe Flash, and I went on a tangent to get back to Macromedia. I see Macromedia as Figma. I see a synergy between what Macromedia was and what Figma is right now. All right. So to me, Figma is an upstart. It's kind of killing the game. and it's worrying Adobe. I felt like Macromedia was an art upstart that was killing the game and was worrying Adobe. And I feel like back then, and I wish I had the year, but it doesn't matter. Back then, Adobe bought Macromedia. And if I can remember, it was something like 3.2 billion, right? So this was, uh, if I had to put a year on it, maybe 2008, 9, I don't know. But it was 3.2 billion then, right? Figma, fast forward to today. Figma was kind of killing them in that space, in the interaction design space. And Adobe said, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. And they were going to buy Figma for 30 billion, which is still amazing. It didn't go through, but it's still amazing that they were going to buy this one program. They bought Macromedia, which contained maybe like 5 or 6 programs. And they had Code Fusion, Freehand, all the ones I mentioned before. And they just bought it all for 3 billion. And now they were about to buy one program that did one thing for 30 billion. It kind of tells me how afraid they were, or how valuable they saw the UI space going forward. So I'm telling my students, like, hey, the fact that Adobe was going to buy Figma for 30 billion, only thing that tells me is that the UI space is fertile right now, right? If it wasn't fertile, they wouldn't even buy them, right? So anyway, fast forward again, Flash was starting to get more developer centric too, because I was really into Flash. I was in Nationwide Insurance at the time. I was the Flash guy, but I noticed that it started implement all the new features were developer centric, which was like very disheartening. So it was like they developed something called Adobe Flex, and it was like I don't know if that started with Macromedia or not. I can't remember, but it was Flex, and it was more like code-based motion design. So you had to use ActionScript code, and it meshed more with JavaScript, and you had to write code to write the motion. So I even got to the point where I didn't use the timeline anymore to create motions like you would do in After Effects or any motion design program. You use the timeline, and I stopped using the timeline, and I started using code to make things move and sound to go and turn things on and off, because it was just more powerful. And that's actually how I learned JavaScript, because ActionScript was very similar to JavaScript. So I learned ActionScript first, and then now it was almost like learning Spanish. But then because I knew Spanish, I kind of knew Portuguese. It's not the same thing, but it was similar enough to me to be able to ask where the restroom is, right? So, and then, fast forward, and I just and I just remember thinking, like, do they realize that designers like us, the creatives, are the ones kind of like keeping them going, right? Like creators use Flash, developers, they're using Flash because, they're using Flash for now, but they don't have to use Flash because they can do a lot of this stuff with heavy code if they want to. And then with Dreamweaver, the same thing. And I felt like after a while, it made it easier to kind of get rid of Flash when basically Steve Jobs decided like, no more Flash, when smartphones came out and things like that. And it just made it weaker, and it made it easier for it just to go away, because you kind of went away from what put you there was designers. And I felt like Macromedia focused on us, and I think Adobe forgot about us, right? So fast forward to now, I feel like that's what's happening with Figma. Interesting enough, I like Figma. I started with Adobe XD. I think they're very, very similar. If a student came to me and asked me like, hey, can I use XD instead of Figma? I'd be like, sure. They're like, I don't even know if they're updating XD anymore, to be honest. But Figma, it was a free program up until just recently. And I think this is my conjecture. I don't know for sure. But I think, I know how startups go, right? So Figma will be considered a startup. And I'm going on another tangent. I'm going to get back to Figma was a startup. But I'm going to get back because I got this split screen. I forgot. See, that's how my mind going. I'm coming straight from class. Remember, these office hour tangents, I'm not sitting there. I'm not scripting anything. I don't have anything planned. I'm just coming straight from class and like continuing my mind going. So anyway, Dreamweaver was dope because of this setup. right? And it also allowed you to, upload things to a server. And it just made more sense to me as a visual person, as a designer, on how it interacted with servers and all those good things. So it was dope. So going back to Figma. Figma startups go this like this usually. I have an idea for a startup tech company. It's a great idea, but I can't do anything unless I have money. In order to get money, I have to get venture capital a lot of times, right? Some individuals with money to take a chance on this business, almost like a gamble, or I get a loan or something like that. Usually with these big companies, there's no loans, it's just venture capital. You have a bunch of investors, right? Some investors might have gave you millions, some might give you thousands, whatever. So they have investors and they don't just invest and say, hey, go at it and good luck. They say, I'm gonna invest this much with the hope that I'll get returned this much. And it's more, right? So Figma takes off and investors, and it's still free. They're not really making any money. So investors are like, yeah, it's taking off. We're about to get paid one of these days. So then the announcement comes out that Adobe's going to buy him for 30 billion, right? So I don't know how much, investment was in Figma. So just say it was, they got 30 million to make it, right? So, that's way less than 30 billion, right? So the investors are like, yeah, we about to get paid. And the founders are like, yeah, we about to cash out, or we about to work for Adobe. So when that deal didn't go through, and that deal didn't go through, and I didn't really read into it a lot, but I know it had something to do with the EU. They kind of said that Adobe was creating a monopoly because they already have XD, and then they would get Figma, so they would like control the market for UI design, and they didn't think that was fair, so they just axed the plan. I think they're still trying to make that deal go, but for now it's axed. So what happens is now the investors are like, well, okay, we still want our money though, right? So the founders, they have to kind of regroup. This is just all conjecture. I don't know if this happened, but this sound like what's happening. They have to regroup and they have to get money. So they have to start charging somebody or something. So who they start charging are developers, right? Because they know they can't start charging us because designers, a lot of us are freelancing, consulting, we're going check to check, or the salaries we're making aren't comparable to what developers get. So with Figma now, a lot of the tools that I like, it gave you like CSS code for different elements. Some of the things I didn't even think I needed, but then I'm like, oh, let me do this. And I'm like, that's behind the paywall for dev mode. They call it dev mode. So you really can't do anything in dev mode that used to be free. You can't do anything in there unless you pay a monthly fee. And it's not a cheap monthly fee. And the last time I checked, I want to say it was like, I don't even put a price because I can't remember it, but it was like enough for me to be like, hell no. So, but they know developers will pay that if they're working for a startup and they're getting paid, $300 an hour or something like that. It's like a nothing burger to them. But to me as a designer, us as designers, I'll just move to another program. They have to realize that they meaning the Adobes of the world, the Figmas of the world, and whoever else is in that space. They have to understand that creatives will just move to the next tool. We don't have them as brand loyalty. I think Adobe feels like we may be loyal to them. And I will, if they're listening, which I know they're not, but if they were listening, I'm like, we don't have any brand loyalty to Adobe. Why do you think so many people are using, so many designers are using Figma now and not XD? If we had brand loyalty, XD would be the industry standard because it's Adobe and we already have it. But Figma came out for free and it was browser based. And then Adobe tries to like, oh, my bad. Like we'll make XD free now and we'll try to make it browser based. It's like too late. We're already in Figma. Like we're not going to go back. We don't, as soon as there's a comparable Photoshop competitor, which there are, I know a lot of our student designers who don't use Photoshop anymore. So I see what's happening with Figma, and I'm employed because I like Figma. If Figma people are you listening, don't forget about the designers. Keep making the project. You can add developer tools, cool, but don't forget about making the designer tools better. and updating those and keeping those going on the update assembly line. A lot of times that gets lost. You be like, designers, they'll be okay. I think a lot of people just treat us like that in like corporations and businesses. Designers, they'll be okay because they're resilient. They're creative. They can fall back on their creativity. They're not really software based. No, we are. We use software all day, every day. We're always on our computers. And we just want something that works. And we really like programs that feel like they were made for us. We get tired of using programs that aren't made for us, but we have to use them anyway because it's the developer's choice or it's the business person's choice. You have to make it like, for instance, a startup I'm working on. I just have to do a basic, flyer for, we're trying to garner funds. So they do presentations, in front of VCs to get money. And when I put together these presentations, they're like, cool, can you give it to us in Microsoft Publisher format so we can make edits? I don't use any Microsoft programs. I just don't. But I have to use it. So I created an InDesign and then figure out a way kind of like to hack it so it's a publisher document so they can edit it, right? But we don't want to do that. So anyway, the message is, designers, we set the market, and then usually we see the market taken away from us when they start leaning more into the developer side, right? And I see that happen with Figma, and I hope it doesn't happen. But if you want to look at history, Figma people or anybody like that, just look back to Macromedia and how all that went down. And that was my tangent. I was just like, hey, remember Macromedia and how Adobe bought them? And then, so today, like, they don't support Dreamweaver anymore. They don't support Flash, is just gone. It's called Adobe Animate. So it's still languishing around, but it's not supported anymore. They just got rid of freehand right off the bat when they bought Macromedia. That was the, competitor to Illustrator. Fireworks, which was super dope. Like, I never really got to use it because I was like already heavy into Photoshop. But they got rid of Fireworks because I think they just put a lot of the features of Fireworks into Photoshop. And that's what I was using for UI design until I, got into XD and Figma. So just historically speaking, the Macromedia story is interesting. If anybody's kind of heavily into Figma, I would just say be careful because Figma might not be the same a year from now, designers. It might be more of a developer tool, and the design tools is 2 years old. Okay? So, on a side note, so another tangent. So talking about Flash, just to kind of, and I remember in a previous O-Tangents, I was talking about, I went over Requiem for a Dream, the website, and I mentioned NeoStream. So it's a dope Flash site, and I did find it on the Wayback Machine, and I wanted to show it to you all because I think it's dope. Then I want to show you the website that I created back in the day that mimicked NeoStream because it was inspiration. And it was the Wild Wild West. And I feel like we're in the Wild Wild West now with AI and crypto and all this tech. And, this is the time where dopeness happens before things get regulated and all that. So this site to me represents the Wild Wild West of the web and how dope the web used to be. To me, the web is not dope anymore. It's kind of like 80% of the websites look exactly the same, right? That's just how it is, especially when they got rid of Flash. When they got rid of Flash, the web got undope to me. It got safer. No, I'm not going to say that it got safer. It got less bloated. Flash was bloated as heck. Flash was the easy entry point for viruses, I guess. But it was like we could do whatever we wanted. So I'm going to show you this site. And for those of you just listening to audio, I kind of talk through it a little bit. But the site is called NeoStream. So if you're familiar with the Wayback Machine, just look up neostream.com and go back to like 2000 and I think it's 2004 or something like that. It'll show you in the Wayback Machine. But like I said, this is like 2004, I believe. So this is NeoStream, and it went through an animation. It's already through this animation, and I have the sound off, but I'm gonna turn the sound on because this is how the web used to be. Some sites you would just go to a website and it just start pumping with music and animations, and it was like you might be in a meeting, you had to turn the sound off. It wasn't very usable, but it was dope. So, and this is like their version one. They had two versions, but this version, see this? Like I don't even know how you would pull this off. I know you could probably do anything with the web now with coding, but I think the only way you could pull this kind of thing off now with modern web technology is you got to pay a developer like $20,000 to do stuff like this. And I was able to do something like this as a designer using Flash for free, right? And I'm just gonna click on some of these and see the animations. Look how dope that is. Come on, man. Serious multimedia company. I was so inspired by this site. Ooh, that thing came in, you like looking at a website. This was like popping. This is a website. This is like a random website. This is not like special. This is like this advertising. It was a design firm, right? And you know, I'm assuming they use like a combination of 3D software and Flash and to make this all rock. And all of these options had different animations to them. Come on, man. How can you pull that off now? It's impossible. I felt like with the web, we went backwards as far as creativity is concerned. And you just, like I said, exploratory sites. Remember I talking about exploratory sites? This was an exploratory site. You saw the animation of one, you had to click on all of these because each of them had a different animation. So even if you wasn't interested in the company, you just want to see the cool stuff that was popping. Let me see. I'm just gonna go through them because why not? Fax. This is how old this is. They have a fax number. And a mail, snail mail if you have, if you will. And it was seamless, right? Dopeness. So, I'm gonna turn the sound off of this. Now, let's look at a page that I did. So a story behind this page, and this is gonna be my last story today. The last tangent of the day. So, when I was at Nationwide Insurance, I had just got there. That's my first professional gig, and I was a graphic designer, right? But I was doing websites too. And I had just got into Flash. I had just found it, and I was just like, yo, this is the dopest thing ever. Let me get into this heavy. And I think the company sent me to New York. They sent me to New York, and I forgot the name of the company. No, that was the conference, Flash Forward Conference. But I went to a Flash Forward Conference, and I went to New York to like learn Flash. I went there twice actually for like 3 days, a 3-day thing to learn Flash. And I knew it, and I didn't have a project to work on. For me to learn things, as I mentioned before, I like to work on the project. That's how I learn the software. So I didn't have a project. So one of my friends, one of my high school buddies that worked at Nationwide also, she was like, yeah, you know, I'm part of the sorority. She was an AKA and the grad chapter, and she was like, yeah, we need a website. We need somebody to design a website for us. Because like at the time, websites were still, not everybody had a website at the time. So we were just talking over lunch or something. And I was like, yo, let me do your website. Like, this is me at 22, 23, something like that. Like, I tell students to this day, like, if you want to learn something, when that person asks you to do something, do it for them for free. And just to learn something new. And then, you know, I tell them, this is another tangent. I say, hey, if you do something for free, especially as a student or early designer, make sure the free comes with the client can't have any input. Like if you do it for free, say, hey, okay, what you need, give me all what you need up front. But during the process, there's no during the process. I'll let you know when it's done because you're getting it for free. Now, if you want input and you want to have meetings, you want to have follow-ups, and you want to have you want to dictate what colors things are going to be, okay, cool. Now it's going to be $4,000 or whatever you charge, right? But if you do it for free, like, hey, you know, use it as a portfolio piece. Say, I'll get back with you. And it's like a win-win situation. You get a great portfolio piece and you learn something and or you get money, right? So I was like, let me do your website. And she was like, all right. She was like, how much you gonna be? I was like, I'll do it for free. But I was like, yo, I don't know how long it's gonna take. because in my mind, I didn't tell her this. Like I have this program that, I really don't know that much yet, that I'm still experimenting with. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'll let you know when it's done. And it's going to have music, and it's going to be the dopest AKA website in the world. That's what I told her. I actually told her that. And she was like, all right. So I went and started getting inspiration. I just went on the web, just like you would go now with Google. And this was before Google was popping. No, this one before Google. Google was still in its infancy. And I started looking for inspiration. And I ran across that NeoStream site that I just showed, right? So you remember it had that circle, almost like a rotary phone kind of interface. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to use this as the basis. Not because it would fit the organization's sensibilities. It's because I thought it was dope, right? So this is what I came up with. And remember, back in the day, so this is, I don't know, this is 2005, something like that. I don't know. It's probably, no, it wasn't. It was earlier than that. But it was industry practice to say, hey, you need the Flash player to like see this site. And if you don't have Flash, go get Flash before you click this button, because it'll come up as a, blocked thing. So it's like, do you have Flash? Cool. And it's like inner site. And this is like terrible usability nowadays. It's like a splash page. It's like, hey, you want to come to my site? And it's like, you sure you want to come to my site? That's what this is. So this is bad usability. But back then it was about dopeness, not usability. And it brings up this little pop-up. And mind you, it's little because of the resolution. Intro. And I made that song in college. So I took that NeoStream concept. I got the music popping. So if you just listen to audio, I have this site up, and this is a beat I made in college. Literally, shout out to my Sans, Daryl. I used his, I think, I forgot the name of the software, but it was like, it had this loops on it, and I was just experimenting with the loops, and this is one of the songs I made. And I used the same concept as NeoStream, but instead of a circle, I put it in the AKA, what they use as the ivy. They use their ivy leaf for a lot of their imagery. I put it in an ivy leaf. I got some imagery in there. I have like instead of the circles, NeoStream had the circles. I used pearls because that's another one of their symbols they use is the pearls, because their founders are considered the pearls. I had music. Listen to this music. This music is not feminine at all. This is a women's organization, and it doesn't fit, but I didn't care because I was just creating dopeness. I really didn't even care if they launched it. It was like I learned so much. It took me 3 months of like working on this every day for 3 months to pull this off. And I learned so much though by creating this thing. So any students listening, the easiest way to learn any kind of software is just to create a project that's real. Like not tutorial, in my opinion, not tutorials, because what tutorials do, it teaches you. It's like the Swiss Army knife analogy. It's like, okay, this is this kind of knife, just the screwdriver. This is how to use all this. But you might use 2 of them things and maybe use none of the other stuff, right? So I like creating a project because anything you want to do new, you're going to have to learn how to do it. But after you do it, it'll stick better than if you learned it from tutorial, right? So anyway, when you roll over these things, of course, you can't do rollovers nowadays, right? You roll over each of these and this little animation akin to the NeoStream site, and you click on them. Look at that. Look at them pearls fall. Oh, that was dope. Come on, man. I was ahead of my time. I don't care. This is like 2003. I don't know. The animation is kind of fast because of the emulation, but you rolled over these arrows to make it scroll. I thought that was, I had their history, all that good stuff. You go back home, and then all of them had a different animation, right? And then each page had a different beat. I was doing too much. No doubt. I was, but I don't care because I learned. And another O-Tangents, I'm gonna showcase all the old websites. I'm gonna showcase my design journey. and I'm gonna just show them. I'm just gonna talk my ish for one of these old tangents, right? Because why not? But what was dope too is if you, I always had the navigation here. So I was always in my designs. I was always navigation centric. I built my designs around the navigation. Always, I always did like that. Like this design is built all the way around the navigation. So the navigation never went away. It's just in a different format. But if you even clicked on the navigation, the secondary navigation, it was, I had it. I would love to look at the flash file of this. I probably can't even do it anymore, but it was a lot going on to make this happen. Right? So, anyway, I took that Neo stream and I made it this AKA site. And to this, I really feel like at the time, I was like, here you go, Soror. And I'm like, and it's the best website in the world. And they actually put it up and they utilized it for a minute. And I feel like it was the best AKA website in the world at the time. It might not have been the most feminine. It might not have been the most brand focused, but it was dope, right? And that's Flash. That's what Flash can do. I don't know how I would pull this off with code or JavaScript or anything like that. I don't even know how. It would take a lot of the interactivity. I could pull off a lot of the animations, no doubt. But interactivity, nah, it's not happening. So anyway, yeah, so to just, I don't even know, to wrap it up, the main, points I'm trying to make is that, look to the past, Figma. Study Macromedia and what happened with Macromedia, because I don't even think Adobe made any money from the purchase of Macromedia. I just think it was one of those things to get one of their competitors gone. It was like Apple purchasing something just to not have them be a competitor anymore. And to me, it didn't make Adobe a more like screen-based, focused conglomerate. It really didn't. It just like they just changed. It just started changing the programs, and I don't even think for the better, right? And they just kind of eventually withered away. So Figma, hopefully, it doesn't fall down that same path of forgetting about who's buttering their bread, and then it just kind of becomes a developer tool until the developers don't like it anymore, and it withers away. So be careful. Then also recognize the dopeness that Flash used to be. I mean, I know there's people out there like Flash was, the last time the web was dope was when Flash was rocking. I don't care. Like apps nowadays, they're not, and they don't have to be. They're meant to be like quick hitters, right? They're not meant to be dope. There are still dope websites out there, but they're like coded dope. They're not like blank canvas designer get busy dope. I like that. Blank canvas designer get busy dope. I should use that in my students. Like, yo, it's blank canvas get busy time, right? You see a blank canvas, and then you don't. When I see a blank canvas and code is not involved, and I can make dopeness. That's why Flash was great for designers. Now it's like anything dope. The more dope you want to make it, the more code it's going to take, and which means the more money it's going to. And then you just like forget it. Let me just do something else, right? So anyway, I'm gonna wrap up this old tangent with that. Look to the past. Hopefully, you got some insight from my design journey and kind of how I got into graphic design. I know I went on a few tangents, but that's the name of the game. That's the name of the show. So yeah, until next time, peace out.